Welcome to the Nonprofit Report, your update on nonprofit organizations, issues, and leaders. I'm your host, Mark Oppenheim. Today, we're talking to Salvador Salort-Pons, Director and President and CEO of the Detroit Institute of Arts. This is part of our Museum Matters series. Salvador, it's wonderful to have you here, and we're going to talk about your article that appeared in the Wall Street Journal called A Model for Financial Stability. Thank you so much for sharing the article with us, and let's delve into it.
Thank you, Mark. It's a pleasure to be here with you.
So I find this really interesting. So I had a relationship with Graham Beale, one of your predecessors. I visited during the real crisis days of the Detroit Institute of Arts. Talk a little bit about how you came to write this article on financial stability and how you've helped the museum, this renowned museum with its fabulous collection, to retain that collection and continue to evolve in Detroit where it belongs.
So this museum has had a long history, and when we look back to the history of the DIA, we see it filled with moments of great difficulty, financial difficulty. And it's been the creativity and the hard work of the DIA staff on board that came up with this amazing financial model or business model that provides financial stability in the short term and financial independence in the long term, while keeps the museum engaged with the community. And it's a model that can be, in my opinion, and in the opinion of others, replicated in other civic institutions like the DIA across the country.
And part of this comes from this idea that the museum is an asset. It's a community asset. It's an asset for Detroit. It's an asset for the entire region and for the state, right? I mean, this is about taking a look at art as being a social benefit, right? Not a philanthropic benefit, but of something that creates the identity of a city.
I think so. I mean, just look at the Rivera murals at the DIA, which are at the center of our building, and it is the treasure of the DIA's collection. They really reflect a key moment in the history of Detroit, which is the creation of all the industries, specifically the automotive industries, and how that creation brought from all corners of the world people to work here in Detroit and put the world on wheels. And I think people, when they come, the traders, and come to the DIA and see those murals, they immediately see themselves identify with these images that are monumental within our Rivera court, and at the same time are painted by Diego Rivera, one of the greatest muralists in history. And he, in several occasions, have said that the Detroit industry murals was his masterpiece.
So when you look at a city and its identity, and you come out of the great cities of Europe, you come out of Spain, you studied in Italy, you see how museums create an identity. Talk about the DIA in Detroit as being the Prado or the Louvre or the British Museum, right? How that those museums create this sense of place, identity. You've already talked about the murals and how that references Detroit's history and Detroit's diverse people. Why is it so important to create these tentpole institutions, these cultural institutions, where people can come and look at themselves through those eyes of the artist?
Absolutely. I think one of the greatest things about Detroit and its region is that we are blessed with a number of diverse communities that the museum has the honor to serve. And on the one hand, the DIA has this very impressive collection, one of the best in the country. I say is the fifth museum in terms of art quality in the United States. And on the other hand, you have this community that comes to the museum, wants to engage with the art, and ones that our exhibitions and art programs reflect their backgrounds. So when at the DIA we put together an exhibition, when at the DIA we acquire a new work of art, when we install these works of art in the galleries, we offer our visitors two opportunities, which I think are very important. On the one hand, you can see the work of art as a beautiful object that brings with it great stories, great moments of the past, connects the community with history, and in a way, their cultures. The second opportunity that we offer when we organize these exhibitions or bring new works of art in our galleries is we see our collection, we see our works of art as a platform that will spark dialogue within communities, that will bring the community together around a beautiful object, and through the power of art, make sure that we have the conversations that are necessary in a way that we help the community move forward and come together. And I think when you do that, when you engage with communities and you do exhibitions, when you do programs that reflect their backgrounds, that reflect their interests, when you create a space within the museum that people, the communities feel comfortable, feel connected, then you start building a connection that is emotional and that brings notions of identity with those communities.
So Detroit has gone through periods of great prosperity. And this is the story of Michigan as well. Flint, for example, used to be the headquarters for General Motors, and then it moved to Detroit, and then the automobile industry became much more dispersed. And with that comes the accumulation of great wealth, and then the wealth disappears. The wealth leaves the area. Why shouldn't museums simply move along with the wealth? In other words, why shouldn't these collections just go to where the wealth is that can support their exhibition without any kind of public engagement? What is the damage of that?
I think historically, American museums have been very reliant on philanthropy and donations from that wealth that you are talking about.
Mm-hmm.
This is the great thing about America, is the culture of philanthropy. One of the things that I learned here when I came to the United States, when you are in Europe, as a Spaniard, I don't think in the time I grew up that people didn't think about giving back to the community the way that Americans do. And for me, this is the great contribution of American history to humankind. People, individuals who were successful in the communities that they lived, they feel the civic responsibility to give back to those communities. And they can support universities, hospitals, but also they support
libraries, right? Carnegie with his library program.
Absolutely. So when you walk around the galleries of the DIA, everything is a gift. But most of it is a gift. Unfortunately, wealth changes places, and when that happens, those museums that benefit of the wealth of individuals, if that wealth disappears or is transferred, then they feel in a position of a struggling position. So and I think this is a good example for the DIA, one needs to start thinking about what are other business models that we can use to continue operating, to continue serving the communities. And that is when you have models that mix the public support with the private support. And the millage that the museum has right now is a great example of it.
So what you're basically saying is that in the normal business cycle of any geography, right, there are going to be times of great prosperity, but also times of great need. And what you're saying is that just like you want to keep your infrastructure at a stable level, even when a community goes through some distress, right? Because if you have infrastructure, you can rebuild. You can evolve, you can continue to thrive, you can develop the next great idea for that region, right? That's part of the infrastructure of the community. You want to create a certain level of stability. So maybe during those times where there is great wealth coming into the Detroit area, you acquire new works because, the philanthropists are making those kinds of contributions. And maybe when the wealth is less, you're just maintaining your exhibition programs, but you're maintaining the museum through this public support so that you don't go through these periodic crises and then lose all your institutions and lose all your art, right?
I think so. I think each museum is different within the communities that they work and also the states that they work. For example, when you go to the museums in Ohio, like the Cleveland Museum or the Toledo Museum of Art, they also suffer from wealth migration, if we want to
Right.
talk it that way. But in the past, they were smart enough to create endowment for operations. So they built a reserve there that they can live from its return over the years. And in that way, they have guaranteed the existence of the museum and its operations for many generations to come. In the case of Michigan, that was not the case, even though in Michigan, there was a lot of wealth with different industries, especially the automotive industries. The DIA was not able to build an endowment that supported its operations for many generations to come. And that is a very interesting aspect of the Michigan culture, I think, and I heard that philanthropists were not so keen on creating endowments because they would think that these cultural institutions would start not working as hard or would relax because they would have guaranteed its operating budget every year. So the DIA, when I arrived in 2008, had an endowment, an operating endowment of around $60 million. And that is not an operating endowment to support
Right.
an organization like the DIA. And that's the moment where, at the because the museum had received public funding from the state at the end of the 20th century and had actually lost most of it. The museum at that time felt that it needed to create something new. And through innovation, produce this business model that is based on tax based on property. And I really want to talk about it because it is a way that by engaging the public, we are able to support this museum, as I mentioned, with greater stability in the short term, but also guarantees the long-term financial independence. And this is how it works. Basically, the residents of Oakland, Wayne, and Macomb County pay, if you own a house that is $200,000, pay $20 in their taxes to the museum every year. The amount that we collect allow us to cover 65% of our operating budget every year, which is fantastic. The other 35%, we cover it through earned income, through philanthropy, and other ways. By doing that, yes.
So what you're doing is the citizens had to vote, right? They had to decide that if I own a $200,000 house, I'm paying $20 to you because it's a benefit to me to have this museum be stable. Because the DIA, people forget, and I'm sure you're there to remind, the DIA's collection, because it was owned by the city and the city was in financial distress and it's a monetary value, right? It was even discussed to sell elements of the collection and to start hollowing out the museum, wasn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. Through the time of the bankruptcy, there was a real threat that the museum would sell its collection. The museum at the time was part of the city of Detroit, and the city of Detroit had a very magnificent debt to pay. And just to put it that way, and the only asset that could be liquidated was the collection of the DIA. But at that time, the museum and board, the state of Michigan, and many private individuals and foundations across the country wanted to support the museum because they understood that having a thriving museum was important for the rebirth and renaissance of a city, and Detroit needed to come back. And we were able to put together over $800 million that was given to the city of Detroit. And in exchange of that, the museum became independent from the city, and now we operate as a private nonprofit.
So now you're a private nonprofit. If I understood this properly, please correct me if I'm wrong. The buildings are still owned by the city, but they're leased. Is that correct, or is even the property owned by the private nonprofit?
The collection, the building, and the grounds are owned by the DIA.
Oh, okay. So now it's all so it's out of reach of the city being able to monetize all of that in order to alleviate any kind of debt that they have.
Well, the city came out of bankruptcy in 2015, and now we have a phenomenal mayor that is doing great things for the city, and there is a great partnership between private and public sector, and there's a lot of investment, and people are moving back to the city. I think, and I'm not exaggerating, but there is not a week that we have a new restaurant in the city of Detroit. Construction for family homes continues to thrive, and it's just amazing what you've seen in the city.
I think it's really interesting that you're basically taking a voluntary sort of vote of citizens who say, okay, we need to maintain this organization, but you're also keeping yourself very much tied in because you still have to fund 40% of your budget through ticket sales, attendance, through programs, through various other means. So is that a good balance of not having the danger of becoming lazy by having a big endowment, not having the danger of becoming lazy by having automatic funding? Is that part of the balance that you're promoting, that sort of combination?
I don't know if we're promoting that balance. I would say that is a balance that works for us. 65% comes from the public sector, 35% we have to figure it out, and we figure it out every year. And on the other hand, in exchange for that 65%, we have a service agreement with the residents of Oakland, Wayne, and Macomb County. And this service agreement has 4 parts. We provide unlimited general admission to the museum and to most of our exhibitions. The second part, we have a very strong school program where we pay for the buses, and we bring the schools here into the DIA. And we work with the teachers so the museum experience for the students is connected or aligned with whatever the teachers are teaching in the schools. We have the third part, a senior program. We pay for the buses, and we bring the seniors here as well, and we offer them a wide array of educational opportunities. And finally, we have a community partnership program, which is very important because it takes the museum beyond the walls of the DIA. So we work with nonprofits in Oakland, Wayne, and Macomb County, and we send our teams and develop with them programs that align with their goals as nonprofits. One example that has been super successful is their Inside Out program. The Inside Out program is a program in which we make high-end reproductions of our works of art, and we place them in front of libraries, our centers, in parks. And once they are there installed, we create walking tours, bike tours. I go sometimes and walk with the community.
Oh, that's fabulous.
It's fabulous.
That is great. I didn't know about that. That is just great.
It brings the community together, and also it allows to raise awareness about what the DIA has. And they love these reproductions, but they also know that they want to see Van Gogh self-portrait. They can come and see the Van Gogh at the DI. One thing that is very important, Mark, about this business model is there is a kind of silent, indirect benefit that is crucial. We mentioned that this millage, in a way, provides financial stability to the museum, predictable funding every year so we can budget. And 2, it keeps the museum fully engaged with the community. But this indirect benefit, the third benefit, is the following. While we have this millage, the museum is not drawing from its operating endowment. Every year, the endowment returns, and that returns is reinvested in the endowment.
So you're building your endowment through this process as well.
Absolutely. So the return is reinvested, and also all the monies that we raise go into this operating endowment. And When I started in 2015 as director, our endowment was 120. Today is 435. And
Fabulous.
we think that when the millage will expire in 2032, the endowment will be around 800 million. And the return of that endowment in 2032 would be significant enough that could replace the monies that we get from the millage. So that means, as I was mentioning to you at the beginning of our conversation, that this millage really provides for financial stability in the short term, but in the long term provides for financial independence. And that means the solution to keep the museum operating for many generations to come.
See, I love this story. I love this story to death because, Salvador, we've been advocating that this combination of an understanding of the art and the artist and the art history and the business acumen to strengthen these institutions. These things are not at odds, but they're very rare combinations. And you can actually look at people and how they think and evaluate whether they will lead in that particular role, whether it's a chief curator or a museum director or some other role, whether they will make their best contribution there. And what you're saying is that you as a Velázquez scholar, right? Right? It's the combination of, I'm serious, right? You have an art historical background, but you're also looking at these institutions as business entities. And how do you create this public service work that doesn't dumb down the art, that makes it accessible, that places great works in public spaces and develops your audience? This is a very sophisticated approach, and the millage is not a crutch. It's an enabling vehicle in how you have described it. It's very impressive.
I think museums in America are run like businesses and should be run like businesses because you really have to think that way, since that, like on the contrary, European museums, especially continental museums, are funded through public funding, through government resources. So you have to think really that museums in America have to be treated a little bit like businesses. And obviously, one thing that businesses are always thinking is about their audiences, their customers. So for us, this millage is great, but we understand that we have to keep the ear on the ground, that we need to work with the community to make sure that we are providing the service that they need. We have to meet the communities where they need us to be. And therefore, how we're going to do our exhibitions, our public programs, our film program, because we have a film theater as well at the DIA, to make sure that what we are doing is resonating with them, that they have a voice in whatever that we are doing. So we actually were the first museum to develop the concept of co-creation, where we co-create installations and exhibitions with the community, because when they come and they see themselves reflected and they see the messages that they are most wanted to read, then you are having a product that is resonating with those communities, is reflecting their backgrounds. They are having a good time in the museum, and in the end, we are being relevant to them, and that happens every year and changes every year. So it is always so important to be listening to these communities, because in the end, and most importantly, we are serving them, and we need to improve our service every year to make sure they get the best product possible.
And in terms of how your board is developed, is your board developed in a way that is true to what you've just described, this whole idea of community connection, but also there are different communities, there are different interests. They're going to be the art collectors. They're going to be the people of wealth. They're going to be the people who have kids in public schools. And they're going to be people whose families have grown up in particular neighborhoods. Are you shaping your board in a way that in Detroit allows you to keep that ear to the ground to have that in the board meetings, have that representation so that you're not just representing the privilege, which happens sometimes in certain institutions?
So that's a really important question. And we would like our staff and governance to reflect the demographic diversity of the communities that we serve. So we look at the residents of Oakland, Wayne, and Macomb County, and working with the census, we have a sense of, the weights of the different communities throughout the region. And we try to incorporate that in our governance and staff. So both the staff and governance should be reflecting the communities that surround us in the Tri-County. Absolutely. It's very important.
Does this come from a political or a values point of view, or does it come out of a practical benefit? I mean, that's the real question. Does this have an operating advantage by having these various communities and peoples and interests represented?
It comes from different places, but perhaps it would surprise you most if I say that this comes from a perspective of business. If we want to do good business, we have to have a diverse team. We have to have a diverse board, having different perspectives at the table, hearing the different information from the different backgrounds, and incorporating that in our decision making is going to make this institution more efficient and more targeted and more successful if we're not diverse and we don't reflect the communities that we serve. So certainly, it's one of our values. We want to be a diverse and inclusive organization, but it's certainly a business need.
Salvador Salort-Pons, Director, President, and CEO of the Detroit Institute of Arts. This has been a fascinating discussion. Thank you so much for sharing your article in the Wall Street Journal, A Model for Financial Stability. We will publish the link. And thank you so much for describing. I certainly feel slightly smarter. Even I can learn, right? In terms of how these institutions not only can serve the public, but be strengthened in a way that creates as much independence as possible, but also engages everybody in their support, giving everybody an interest as an audience member, as a community member, as a supporter, as a visitor, and as staff and board. Thank you. Thank you for your time and for your wisdom.
Thank you for the opportunity, Mark. It's been a great pleasure speaking with you. Thank you.